The bobcat first appeared at the ranch water trough just after noon, when the sun was at its hottest and the land around Hollow Creek Ranch seemed to shimmer under the weight of it. At first, Wade Turner thought the heat was playing tricks on his eyes. Nothing wild moved much at that hour, if it could help it. The cattle huddled in the thin shade of cottonwoods near the dry wash. The horses stood with drooping heads in the loafing shed. Even the wind seemed too tired to cross the pasture. So when Wade looked up from the gate chain he was fixing and saw a bobcat pacing around the old galvanized stock trough in the middle pasture, he stopped with one hand still gripping the rusted latch and just stared. A wild bobcat in broad daylight was unusual enough. A wild bobcat circling water under the worst heat of the day without drinking from it was something else entirely. Hollow Creek Ranch sat outside a small town in West Texas, where the land opened wide and flat before breaking suddenly into mesquite, scrub, and dry creek beds. Wade had worked the ranch since he was 20 and owned it since his father died 12 years earlier. At 52, he had the heavy forearms and weather-cut face of a man who had spent more of his life outdoors than in, and the practical habits that came from long years of solving problems with pliers, diesel, wire, and patience. He trusted signs most people missed: fence sag, hoof wear, cloud shape, the way cattle looked at a water source if a snake had gotten too close. Animals told you things if you paid attention. But this bobcat was telling him something in a language he did not yet understand. The trough sat on a packed dirt pad beside the cross fence, fed by a buried line that came off the windmill tank farther uphill. It was one of the older troughs on the property, deep and oval, with a float valve on one side and a concrete apron cracked from decades of hooves and heat. Wade had checked it that morning. Clean enough. Water level good. No dead rodents. No algae mat. No leak obvious from the inlet. Yet the bobcat would not leave it alone. It paced once around the trough, stopped at the near edge, leaned over the water, then jerked back and circled again. Every few passes it looked toward Wade, then back at the trough. Not at the water generally, at one specific side of it. The animal was lean, tawny and compact, with dark ear tufts and a coat mottled in dusty spots that nearly vanished against the pasture color. It was not limping, not mangy, not obviously sick, just tense, focused, wrong for the moment. Wade wiped sweat from the back of his neck and called across the pasture to his hired hand, Miguel Alvarez, who was loading mineral tubs onto the flatbed by the barn lot. Miguel looked up, followed the line of Wade's arm, and squinted hard against the glare. "That a bobcat?" he shouted. "Sure is." Miguel set down the tub and started over, boots kicking dust. By the time he reached the fence, the bobcat had made another full loop around the trough and stopped dead at the south end, head low, eyes fixed on the water surface. "Well," Miguel said quietly, "that ain't normal." Miguel was 47, steady as a post, and had worked cattle and fences alongside Wade for almost 9 years. He was not prone to drama. If he called something not normal, it was worth attention. For a minute, neither man moved. The sun beat down. A horsefly drifted near Wade's face, and he slapped it away without taking his eyes off the trough. The bobcat leaned forward again, not drinking, just watching the water. Then it pulled back and let out a short, rough sound that was not a hiss, not quite a growl, more like a sharp complaint torn from somewhere deeper than threat. Miguel frowned. "You think there's something in there?" Wade almost said no on principle. A bobcat lingering around livestock water usually meant thirst. Maybe a dead bird floating in the trough, maybe a snake underneath the apron. But before he could answer, a tiny disturbance puckered the water near the side where the bobcat kept stopping. Just a tremble. A cluster of tiny bubbles rose from below, broke the surface, and vanished. Wade's whole body tightened at once. He had seen bubbles in troughs before, from a leaking inlet line or a stuck float valve. This was not that. These rose in a quick, tight stream from below the shadowed side, then stopped. The bobcat stepped closer immediately, stretched its neck over the rim, and gave that same harsh, urgent cry. Miguel looked from the bubbles to the animal and back again. "Something's down there," he said. The two men climbed the fence slowly, not wanting to spook the cat into some wild reaction if it really was guarding or desperate. But even when they came into the pasture and started walking toward the trough, the bobcat did not bolt. It moved back a few yards, just enough to make room, then stopped and watched them, with the kind of fixed intensity Wade had only seen in cows standing over a trapped calf or mares pacing a fence when a foal got itself wedged somewhere stupid. He did not like the thought that came next, but once it arrived, it would not leave. A kitten. Bobcats denned in the brushy cuts down by the dry wash all the time. A kitten could fall. A kitten could climb where it had no business and go silent until a mother found it too late. But how in the world would anything be in a livestock trough without drowning? Wade quickened his pace. Up close, the water looked oddly dark on one side. The sun reflected hard off the surface, but beneath the shine he could see movement. Not swimming exactly, more like a shifting shadow pressed below the lip, where the trough wall curved inward. Then the bubbles rose again, frantic and sudden. Wade lunged to the rim and leaned over. At first he saw only the murky greenish water, the reflection of his own hat brim, and the dim outline of the submerged overflow standpipe in the trough's center. Then something moved beneath the south rim, small, spotted, struggling. A bobcat kitten, barely bigger than his hand, was wedged in the narrow gap between the trough wall and the rusted vertical brace that had been bolted inside decades ago to support the old float housing. One forepaw had slipped through the brace gap, and its body had twisted halfway beneath the waterline so that it could only get its nose up in tiny, desperate bursts. Each time it pushed upward, bubbles rose. Each time it slipped, the water swallowed it again. Dios mío, Miguel breathed. Wade did not think. He dropped to both knees in the mud by the trough, shoved one arm into the hot water to the shoulder, and groped for fur. The kitten thrashed weakly against his hand. The metal brace was rough with rust and the gap tighter than it looked from above. He could touch the kitten's back but not get a grip. "I can't get it straight," he snapped. Miguel was already moving. "I'll hold the cat off." But the mother bobcat did not come at them. She circled once behind the trough, then stopped at Wade's left shoulder, close enough to make the hair on his arms rise, and stood rigid, watching his arm disappear into the water. Not attacking, not trusting, just locked to the only thing that mattered. "Need to drain it," Miguel said. Wade looked instantly toward the outlet plug at the far end of the trough. It was an old threaded drain, half seized with mineral scale and mud, set low on the outside wall. Under normal conditions, you used a wrench or pipe key, gave it time, cursed a while, maybe hit it with penetrating oil. They did not have time. The kitten surfaced for half a second, drew one tiny gasping breath, and slid back under. Wade heard himself make a sound like a growl. "Get the truck," he barked, "and every wrench you've got." Miguel ran. Left alone, Wade kept one arm in the trough to steady the kitten as best he could, trying to hold its head nearer the surface without forcing it harder into the brace. The metal edge bit into his wrist. The sun baked the back of his neck. Water sloshed against his chest as the kitten struggled, then weakened. The mother bobcat paced 3 tight circles, then returned to the same place near his shoulder, staring into the trough with eyes so wide and fierce he could not bear to meet them for long. "I got you," he muttered, whether to the kitten or the mother he could not have said. "I got you. Hold on." The strange thing was how careful the mother was. Twice she came close enough that Wade could feel her presence like heat at the edge of his vision. Twice she stopped short, muscles bunched, every instinct in her body plainly at war with itself. Run from humans. Fight humans. Stay with the kitten. She chose the third thing again and again. Stay. A wild thing forcing itself not to act because acting would ruin the only chance left. Wade would remember that longer than anything else. Miguel came back in a spray of dust with the ranch truck, a toolbox, a pry bar, and Wade's daughter Tessa in the passenger seat. "I told her to stay put," Miguel said as she jumped out before the truck even fully stopped. Tessa was 22, home from an agricultural science program at Texas Tech for the summer, and had inherited her father's stubborn jaw and her mother's quick brain. One look at the scene, the bobcat near the trough, Wade soaked to the shoulder, Miguel hauling tools, and all color left her face. "Is there a kitten in there?" she asked. Wade did not waste breath confirming. "Drain plug," he said. "Now!" Tessa dropped to the far side of the trough and attacked the drain fitting with a pipe wrench while Miguel jammed the pry bar through for leverage. The plug didn't move. Years of lime and rust held it like weld. The mother bobcat flinched at the metallic racket but still would not leave. Wade could feel the kitten growing weaker under his hand, its movements smaller now, more like trembling than struggle. "Come on," he hissed at the plug as if it could hear him. Miguel reset the wrench. Tessa braced one boot against the concrete apron and pulled with both hands. Metal screamed. Then with a sudden violent crack, the plug broke loose and shot out in a gush of rusty water that splashed across the mud in their boots. The water level dropped fast, but not fast enough. As it fell, the kitten sagged lower against the brace, one tiny leg still threaded through the narrow gap. Wade leaned farther in, now able to see it more clearly. Its eyes were open but glassy with shock. The spotted fur along its neck and shoulders lay plastered tight. "Almost," he said, voice gone rough. "Almost." Once the level dropped below the kitten's chin, he slipped his other hand into the trough and tried to free the trapped foreleg. The brace edge had caught not just fur, but the skin fold above the paw, twisted at a bad angle. "Need the water lower," he said. Miguel grabbed the inlet valve and shut off the supply completely. Tessa dragged away the muddy clump of grass that had partly blocked the drain outside, and the stream strengthened, sucking with a hollow rushing sound. The mother bobcat made a soft broken noise then, unlike anything Wade had ever heard from a predator. It was too raw to be threat, too desperate to be called a cry. He glanced up once and saw her crouch so low her belly nearly touched the ground, eyes fixed on the kitten, tail twitching in tiny violent movements. She knew the moment was changing. She knew they were close. When the water finally dropped below the brace, Wade worked the tiny foreleg backward with one finger while supporting the kitten's chest with the other hand. The kitten gave a thin squeal and jerked. For one awful second, he thought he'd break the limb. Then it came free in a rush, all at once, and the kitten collapsed into his palms like a wet rag. Wade lifted it from the trough and turned instinctively away from the rim, clutching the trembling little body against his shirt. Tessa gasped. Miguel let out the breath he had been holding in a hard burst. The mother bobcat moved before any of them did. She sprang to within 2 feet of Wade, close enough that he could see every bead of water on her whiskers, every black edge of her ear tufts. Her mouth opened, and he braced for a lunge. It did not come. Instead, she made a rapid, urgent churring sound, eyes locked on the kitten in his hands. Wade looked down. The kitten was breathing, barely, but it was breathing. One paw hung awkwardly, and its body shook in tiny aftershocks. He knelt slowly and set it on the driest patch of dirt near the trough. Then he backed away at once, pulling Tessa with him. The mother rushed in. She sniffed the kitten from head to tail in frantic sweeps, then began licking water from its face and nose with fierce, fast strokes. The kitten gave one ragged little cough, then another, then a thin cry that seemed to split the air open. Tessa made a noise like she'd been punched in the chest. Miguel looked away and swore softly into his hand. Wade just stood there in a soaked shirt, water running off his sleeve, and watched a wild mother drag a baby back toward life, one lick at a time. The kitten tried to rise and immediately collapsed. Its foreleg, the one that had been caught, would not take weight. Wade frowned. "That leg's bad." Tessa nodded, wiping at her eyes with a muddy wrist. "Maybe strained. Maybe worse." None of them wanted to say what came next because saying it meant stepping closer to a line already blurred beyond anything sensible. The mother could maybe carry the kitten, but if the leg was injured badly enough, carrying it wrong could make things worse. On the other hand, trying to take the kitten for treatment might send the mother bolting or attacking or simply losing track of the baby altogether. Ranch life was full of decisions where no option was clean. This felt sharper than most. "Call Dr. Larkin," Wade said. Tessa was already reaching for her phone. Doctor. Nora Larkin was the nearest large animal vet, but like everyone in the county, she also ended up looking at working dogs, orphan fawns, and the occasional hawk someone found tangled in netting. She answered on the third ring, listened to Tessa's fast, breathless explanation, and after a pause said the one useful thing. "Do not grab the kitten unless the mother abandons it. Keep distance. Watch whether it can be carried. I'm 15 minutes out." 15 minutes. Under ordinary circumstances, that would have felt long. In the strange held stillness around the trough, it became its own kind of world. The sun climbed. Water from the drained trough spread in a muddy fan over the apron. Cattle watched from the cottonwood shade as if they understood this was not their business. The mother bobcat groomed and repositioned the kitten, nudging it to lie sternal instead of on its side, licking the trapped foreleg repeatedly. Once she looked toward Wade again, and he felt that same disorienting sense that he was being measured not as a threat or not threat, but as part of the problem that had briefly become part of the solution. He did not like how much that moved him. When Dr. Larkin arrived in her dusty SUV, she got out carrying a towel, a stethoscope, and the same composed expression she wore for difficult calvings and upset horse owners. She was 50, practical, sun-lined, and had been patching up everything from steers to barn cats in the county for 2 decades. One look at the scene, the drained trough, the soaked rancher, the bobcat mother crouched over a kitten in the mud, and she let out a low breath. "Well," she said softly, "that's extraordinary." Wade gave her the short version. She listened, eyes on the animals the whole time. "And she stayed?" "Never left," Tessa said. Dr. Larkin nodded once, as though that settled something. They could not approach directly without risking the fragile piece. So Nora crouched 20 feet away with binoculars and watched the kitten's breathing, posture, and limb use while the mother continued grooming. "Good chest rise," she murmured. "Responsive. Foreleg likely strained or compressed, maybe soft tissue only. If she can carry and relocate, that's the best outcome." She lowered the glasses. "The question is whether she'll manage it." As if answering, the mother bobcat rose and tried to take the kitten by the scruff. The kitten cried sharply when its injured foreleg dragged, and she stopped at once. Tried again. Same result. She set it down and licked the leg more fiercely, agitated now, looking between the kitten and the mesquite line beyond the pasture fence. Nora made a decision quickly. We give her help without taking control. From her truck, she brought a shallow rubber feed pan lined with the dry towel and had Wade slide it across the dirt with a rake handle, keeping everyone well back. The mother flinched, growled low, and moved over the kitten protectively. But when no one came closer, she allowed the pan to remain. It gave the kitten a dry surface and slight support if she needed to drag or carry it in stages. Then all they could do was wait. The weight stretched. Heat shimmered over the pasture. A red-tailed hawk circled high and drifted off. The mother bobcat lay with one flank against the kitten, shielding it from direct sun while continuing to lick the leg and face. Several times the kitten lifted its head and answered her with tiny raspy chirps. Wade had never heard anything so small sound so determined. Tessa stood beside him with her hand wrapped around the fence rail so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Miguel, usually restless in any pause, did not move at all. At last the mother stood again. She tested the scruff once more, adjusted her bite higher, then lifted. This time the kitten let out only a weak complaint and did not twist. The mother carried it 3 steps, set it into the towel-lined pan instead of the dirt, and seemed for a moment to consider the arrangement. Then, astonishingly, she took hold of the towel edge itself and tugged. The pan slid an inch in the mud. Wade stared. Nora exhaled a short, incredulous laugh. Smart girl. The mother abandoned that idea after one more tug, but the experiment had changed something. She lowered her head, nudged the kitten deeper into the fold of towel, then took the scruff again with the forelegs supported partly by the cloth beneath it. This time she managed 4 steady steps before setting the kitten down to rest. And so she moved it. Not in one clean run, but in short, careful carries, pausing every few yards to lick the leg, reposition, and gather strength. Each time she stopped, the human stayed back and silent, forming no wall, offering no pressure. From the trough apron to the mesquite patch by the fence, then through the gap beneath the lowest wire where only the bobcats could fit, then toward the dry wash where the grass grew taller. At the edge of the wash, she paused one final time and looked back. Wade would never have put foolish words on that moment. He did not think the wild existed to reassure human feelings. But he knew what he saw. A mother that had come into the open at noon, stalked circles around a cattle trough, and refused to leave because something below the waterline still breathed. She had held up her own fear long enough for clumsy human hands to do what she could not. Then she had taken over again. That was enough. Then she turned and vanished into the wash with the kitten against her chest. No one spoke for a while after she was gone. Finally, Miguel looked into the empty trough and said, "We need to cut that damn brace out." Wade nodded at once. The old rusted support, harmless looking for years, had nearly killed something because nobody had questioned it. By evening, he had the trough emptied fully, the brace removed with an angle grinder, and a note written to inspect every water point on the ranch for hazards a small animal could slip into. Tessa made a checklist and added wildlife escape ramps to the feed store order. Nora filed a brief report for county wildlife records, mostly because she believed unusual rescues deserved to be learned from. And Wade, after a long shower and a longer silence on the porch that night, found himself replaying not the rescue itself, but the sight of the bobcat circling the trough before they understood. How insistently she returned to the same patch of water. How precisely she'd read the only humans likely to listen. 3 days later, a trail camera Nora set near the wash caught a grainy evening image of a mother bobcat moving through bluestem with two kittens. One of them held a foreleg a little stiffly, but kept pace. She texted the photo to Tessa first, knowing Wade would pretend not to care until it was printed and set in front of him. He studied it without speaking, then pinned it to the tack room board beside vaccination records and hay invoices. Miguel saw it the next morning and nodded once. "Worth draining a trough over," he said. After that, the ranch changed in small practical ways that mattered. Overflow pipes got screens. Trough interiors were checked for pinch points. Wade started leaving one shallow escape board in every stock tank where a calf could not use it, but a smaller animal might. When neighbors asked why, he told them the story plain. A bobcat kept circling the trough and wouldn't leave. Then we saw bubbles. Some laughed because it sounded like the beginning of a tall tale. Others didn't. The ones who worked land long enough usually didn't. They knew better than most that desperation teaches every creature strange forms of intelligence, and that survival is often a collaboration nobody planned. Wade never saw that same bobcat up close again. Once, late in the summer, he thought he caught sight of a tawny shape above the wash at dusk, with two half-grown kittens moving through the grass behind it. One paused and looked back, then vanished. Maybe it was them. Maybe it wasn't. It hardly mattered. What mattered was that on one brutal noon, when nothing wild should have chosen the open, a mother bobcat walked straight into the center of a working ranch and stayed beside a cattle trough until a man who thought he understood livestock water better than anything else on his land learned to notice bubbles. And because he did, one small life came up out of the dark water and back into the heat and dust and living world where it belonged.